Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Weekly Reads. I've had a pretty good reading week. Over the weekend, I read Dictatorland by Kenyon. This is a history of post-colonial Africa, focusing on the number of dictators who took over their respective countries mostly in the immediate aftermath of liberation or independence, and a few that took over their countries later. And so the book is divided into 4 parts, centered around resource. The first part is gold and diamonds, and the countries focused on are the Congo, later Zaire, and now currently the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Zimbabwe. And the dictators focused on are Mobutu Sese Seko and Robert Mugabe. The second part is oil, and the dictators focus on, and the countries are Libya, Nigeria, and Equatorial Guinea, with the focus on Muammar Gaddafi, Sani Abacha, and Teodoro Obiang. The third part is chocolate, and the only country in this part is Cote d'Ivoire, and focusing on Felix Houphouët-Boigny. And then in the fourth and final part of modern slavery is focused on Eritrea and Isaias Afwerki. So in the oil and chocolate sections, there's a Before the Dictators section, in which the history of the resource in question during colonialism is explored, or immediately after independence. And the chocolate section is one of a number of instances where Kenyon did some personal reporting. Kenyon is a journalist who often works for the BBC, and so in the chocolate section he was focusing on the prevalence of slave labor in the chocolate industry, which has a very long history. He also did personal reporting in the Congo chapter, the Libya chapter during the Civil War, and also the Eritrea chapter. So each country-focused chapter starts with the rise to power of these particular dictators and their time in office, and how they basically stole resources, money from the treasury, their corruption schemes, how they kicked back to their supporters, that sort of thing. So yeah, this was a really good book. I really enjoyed it. It's quite powerful, a lot of gut punch chapters and instances, particularly the final chapter focused on Eritrea, where which I think in part comes from the fact that it follows the Cote d'Ivoire chapter, and Felix Houphouët-Boigny, who, relatively speaking, wasn't that bad. I mean, yes, he stole a lot from the treasury and probably pilfered directed resources, contracts to his cronies, and that sort of thing. But he was a relatively mild dictator compared to a lot of them. And the Eritrea chapter is very much one of the few chapters in which the dictator is still standing. And the particulars of what is going on in Eritrea, from the little that comes out, is rather horrifying. But yeah, so this was really a good book. And if you haven't read it and are looking to read African history, I highly, highly recommend this book. It is amazing. Over the course of the work week, I read Louise Gluck's Poems 1962 to 2012. This pretty much, except for I think one book that she published after this contains her entire oeuvre. Her typical subjects are family, relationships, usually with a heavy emphasis on nature imagery. And I quite liked it for the most part. There isn't a bad poem in the entire collection. None really jumped out at me as super spectacular. But for me in poetry, I'm a much more critical reader. Although I'm also not terribly skilled at criticizing or interpreting poetry. So it's one of the weird things about me as a reader. But there were quite a few poems that I did really like. My one critique is that she often uses the same name for her poems. So there's a lot of matins, a lot of vespers, a lot of abads, and in one of the later collections, I think Averno, a lot of leaf burnings. And that can kind of get a bit weird. So anyway, but yes, I really enjoyed this collection and highly recommend it. So I didn't get as much read this week as I would have liked. In part because I had a few family obligations and things to do. Yesterday, Thursday, was my nephew War's birthday. War is one of the 4 children of the apocalypse. My 2 nieces and 2 nephews. War is the oldest of the nephews. So we went over to his parents' house to celebrate, and it was pretty good. Things turned out well. There was a point where things could have gone incredibly poorly, but he rallied, and that was good. And then today we watched the 4 while my brother and sister-in-law had a meeting, a phone meeting, which having the 4 children of the apocalypse around is not a very good idea. While famine and pestilence don't really make a whole lot of racket, war and death do. And while it is a glorious racket, it is still distracting. So we watched them and we had a blast. They were really good, and they got to do their antics and stuff. Had fun. So I didn't get to read any manga this week. I might be able to read some next week, depending if there are any fails or I have any free time. And also depending how the history reading challenge or history readathon that's coming up in about a week, how that's going to turn out. Because I have a pile of possibilities that I'll be reading or aiming for this coming week. if the history reading challenge starts on Monday, I'll try to read 3 novels. I'm in a mood for fiction right now, so I have a pile of fiction here, and so yeah. So if the history reading challenge starts on Monday, I will try to get 3 novels in. If it starts on Sunday, I will probably try to get a manga in for that Saturday. So we'll see how it works, and I'll report back next weekly reads. But for now, the pile of possibilities I have are 2 rereads, 2 works of 1 fantasy novel, 1 science fiction anthology. I am a co-host for New Worlds November, where we will be reading science fiction short works, and I kind of want to go through some of my anthologies and talk about them. And then 2 general fiction, literary fiction novels. So anyway, let's get started. So the book that I will be reading starting tomorrow is The City of Lost Fortunes by Bryan Camp. This is the urban fantasy or contemporary fantasy novel set in New Orleans around 2010. It is about Jude Dubuisson, who is a trickster magician. He has a knack for finding lost things. One day he goes to a poker game where he is playing against gods, and later that evening or night, the fortune god of New Orleans is murdered, and Jude is tasked with finding who killed the fortune god and trying to prevent a number of unsavory gods from taking over the role of fortune god. I love this book. I've read it twice. Once when it first came out in 2017 or 2018, and then again in 2019 when the sequel Gather the Fortunes came out. And I'm looking forward to a 3rd book in this series. I really want a 3rd book in this series, or at least something else by Bryan Camp. So far I haven't been able to find anything, but I'm going to keep looking and hope, because this book is fantastic, and I'm looking forward to returning to it. So the second reread, or that will be a reread, that I'm aiming for possibly, is Priest of Bones by Peter McLean. This is the first book in the War for the Rose Throne trilogy. It is a fantasy inspired by Peaky Blinders. It is the story of Thomas Piety, who is a kind of a local organized crime boss, who is one of many who are conscripted to fight a war, and when they return, he, having become a priest for a war goddess during the war to his hometown, he discovers that his organization has been dismantled, that his properties have been stolen from him, and in this book he seeks to gain that back, to reassert himself. But as he kind of like gets what's his back, he finds himself embroiled in politics. And getting embroiled in politics may screw him over, or it may enrich him beyond his wildest dreams. I really enjoyed this book. This will be the first time I've reread it. I have read the sequel, and I'm going to be getting the final book in the trilogy in a few weeks. Annoyingly, and an annoying thing for Peter McLean, because this seems to happen to him constantly during his writing career, is he writes trilogies, and the third book in the trilogy ends up getting canceled. And I don't know why an American release for Priest of Gallows got canceled, because Priest of Bones and Priest of Lies are amazing books, and I don't know why a third book was canceled. Fortunately, his British publisher did publish the third book, and I bought it. I actually ordered it this morning from Book Depository, so I'll be getting it in a few weeks, and I will gobble it up probably in September or October. Anyway, but I am looking forward to getting to the Priest of Bones at some point too. So the next book is a new release that came out earlier this year, and that is The Bone Maker by Sarah Beth Durst. I read her earlier book, Race the Sands, a few months ago, and thought it was pretty good. And I'm looking forward to getting to this. It's about a group of heroes decades after the standard epic battle, and one of them is trying to resurrect her husband in a ritual that is forbidden and likely threatens to bring back whatever epic big bad they defeated decades ago. And I'm excited for this. The anthology I'm going to be reading is, or I might be getting to, is New Sons, original speculative fiction by people of color, edited by Nisi Shawl. I picked this up about 2 years ago? Yeah, because I think there was a number of interesting anthologies that came out about 2 years ago. I picked up 2 of the 3 or 4, I think. And I'm quite looking forward to getting to this. Of course, I could also possibly hold this over until New World's November, depending exactly how I want to approach that. Right now, my thought is I want to sort of do a split of focusing, because I'm also going to be doing nonfiction November. So as I've mentioned a few times before, I want to read science books this year. I've picked up a few. I might add a few more until up to November. But what I want to do is read a nonfiction book and then read from an anthology. So far, my thought is to read from one of my big decade-spanning anthologies. I just recently picked up the Big Book of Science Fiction, edited by the Vandermeers, which is a strong possibility because the book runs the gamut of science fiction. Another idea I have is to read 2 of the big David Hartwell anthologies that focus on hard science fiction. I have some plans maybe for his space opera anthology, but the problem with those 3 is that one of them came out in the mid-90s, I think 94, which means the earliest or the most recent story will be at least about 30 years old. And the other 2 came out in the I think 2002 area, and so those stories will be about 20 years old. So, and I kind of want a mix of older science fiction and newer science fiction. So I'm not entirely sure how I want to approach this. But I will talk more about this when I get closer to New Worlds in November. And I really should be talking about these anthologies that I have picked up or that have been in my collection for a few years now. But anyway, I'm nattering on about New Worlds in November, and I have 2 more books to talk about for this week, maybe. We shall see. So, the 2 general fiction, literary fiction, whatever you want to call them, books I'm planning on picking up are 2 that I originally bought with a mind to reading for my America 20 project, which was a reading project where I would pick 20 American novels that you could classify as literary or general or realistic. It didn't quite turn out how I'd hoped it would, generally because for the past few months, well, more like a year or more, and really is regarding literary fiction, general fiction, realistic fiction, that I've had a hard time reading them for a number of years now. And so I was wanted to do this project, but at the same time I'm having a hard time reading them. But I do want to get to them. And so I think now is as good a time as any to have at them, and maybe reading City of Lost Fortunes will kind of give me that extra push or encouragement or momentum to really read one of these 2, maybe. We shall see. So the first of these 2 is The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai. This is a novel that it deals with the AIDS crisis in the 80s 80s, and then does a time jump, I think, to near contemporary years, and deals with a mother looking for a missing child. So I'm quite looking forward to it. I read a good chunk of the first chapter before I bought the book, and I quite liked what I read. So I am cautiously optimistic. And finally, the second possible is There by Tommy Orange. This is a work of Native American fiction that I read parts of the first chapter and quite liked. So yeah, we'll see. So that's my reading plans for next week. Well, yeah, this coming week. And again, depending on how the history reading challenge works out, will depend what exactly I read this coming weekend. I'm probably going, I don't know if I will combine my history reading challenge TBR into next week's weekly reads, or do a separate video. I think you're supposed to do a separate video when you participate in reading challenges, or reading events. So I don't know. I might do that. And then just repeat exactly what I'm going to read in what order during weekly reads. Or I might give myself a pile of possibilities and then fill it down for weekly reads. That could be an option too. Oh, anyway, I'm also planning on doing some a lot more tag videos this coming week. There are a lot of really interesting tags that have been coming out the past few weeks that I've been meaning to do, but I've been running out of time, so hopefully I'll be able to get to them. So we shall see. So until next week, BookTube, thank you, have a great evening and weekend, and I will see you on Monday, hopefully, if not, definitely on Tuesday. So until then, BookTube, stay safe.